Welcome to Lunch Break. Topic today: how can we stop losing deals when we're not in the same room with our buyers? Wow. Okay, so that's a huge topic. Let's break it down into smaller pieces that we can digest. So why is that an important topic? Let's have a look at the data. Most deals are lost when sales is not in the same room. So when our champion and buyer has discussions with their internal decision-making committee. So we're not invited to the table yet. And that's where most of the deals are lost, because we're just not there, right? And we need to find a way how we can control conversations and lead conversations when we're not present, so that we can influence and lead these conversations in our champion and our buyer and their decision-making committee. So that's what we are talking about today. So how can we influence and control these conversations? There's a couple of things that we need to have, and we want to have our ducks in a row. The question remains, how can we influence and control conversations between our champion, our buyer, and their decision-making committee? Couple of things. So let's start. Number one, well, first of all, we need to have a champion. What does that mean? Well, we need someone who already buys into our solution and loves it and is committed to get it. And ideally, they understand our value proposition and what we bring to the table. So having a champion, that's a great start. And now we need to work with that champion. We need to understand ourselves as the vendor, as the sales team. We need to understand the hidden veto stakeholders. Now, what do I mean by hidden veto stakeholders? There's not only just one decision maker in B2B, especially when you look at complex corporations, large corporations. On average, I think the last number is we have to deal with 8 decision makers. So there's a committee of decision makers. There's budget holders, decision makers, peers of that champion, and so forth. So we cannot only talk to one buyer or one person in that organization and hope for the best. So in B2B, corporate sales, enterprise sales, that simply is not enough. So we need to understand our champion's peers in the organization, who are the people that he or she is talking to on a regular basis. So basically, if we imagine the org chart, we need to know who is above, beyond, below our champion, and who's on the same level. Who are the people that they interact with on a daily basis, and especially when it comes to making a decision. So we need to understand that structure. Then we can put that into how we can lead that conversation. Number 3, we need to identify how they make decisions. We need to understand their criteria. What criteria do they have individually and as a decision-making committee to greenlight such a purchase? So everybody in the decision-making committee, that's an individual. We're talking human to human here. And everybody has their preferences, everybody has their ups and downs under that roof of an enterprise organization. So we need to be more a psychologist than anything else to understand how do they tick, what makes them tick, what makes them say yes to a purchase and say no to another project. So what's their priority? So that is something that we need to find out and figure out together with our champion. And number 4, we need to equip our champion with knowledge, especially knowledge of the probing sales framework, which means nothing else than we need to help them get their decision makers through their own buying funnel. We need to help them prevent objections and then help them make a decision in our favor on their terms. Now, let me say that again, because I think that's really important, especially for B2B and enterprise sales. Our job in sales is to help our buyers and their decision-making committee to make a decision, ideally in our favor, but on their terms. Part 2. How can we now uncover potential resistance with the help of the probing sales framework? And by resistance, I mean budget holder resistance or decision maker resistance. Well, we will ask our champion a series of questions to help us understand what's going on their side. And that is crucial. If we don't understand how they operate, how they buy, how they make a decision, and we will never be able to close a sale, or very, very rarely. So before we do that, before we ask our champion these questions, I'm going through the questions in just a minute. We need to make sure that our champion really buys into our solution and into us as a vendor. That's what a champion is all about, right? So that's someone in the organization that is really convinced about us as a vendor and our solution. Number 2, we should aim to have a good relationship, to have a good rapport with our champion. And I don't mean that hoochie-coochie kind of bullshit. Yeah, so don't get me wrong. We don't need to, have the best relationship like it's a friend now. It's all about a professional relationship. People buy from people who are alike, and people like alike people. So once we have that rapport, once we have something that clicks between us and our champion, that's the first step. That's brilliant, right? So we need to have that certain level of trust. They need to trust us. They need to see us as an authority. They need to see us as someone who can help them and not just someone wanting to sell. I think that's really, really important. Number 3, we need to listen carefully to how our champion uses words and phrases. So there's a little bit of NLP coming in there, a little bit of psychology coming in there. Why is that important? Why do we need to understand how they frame and phrase certain things? Well, they will only be successful in having the discussion with their budget holders, having the discussion with their decision-making board, if they speak in their own words about us as a vendor and our solution. If we put words forward that sound good to us, that is great marketing, blah, blah, that is great sales, blah, blah, it will not come across as authentic. And what we need to do, need to have from our champion is to be absolutely authentic and give them all the tools that they need in order to have a conversation with their budget holder in their own words, and then convince that budget holder to move the deal forward. Not necessarily to close it straight away, but at least to move it forward so we can go on in the next step. And it's so important to do that in their own language. And every buyer, if you have, if you make discovery calls and demos, you will notice that every buyer, every prospect has their specifics about how they phrase something, the words that they use, the phrases that they use. And as soon as you are able to identify that and to a certain degree mirror that without mocking it, you can facilitate connection way faster than if you just use your own marketing blah blah and sales slang, right? Again, we're talking human to human here. And as soon as we understand that it's all about psychology, then it opens up, a lot of opportunities. What else do we need? Well, your champion must be open for some guidance and coaching. And even if they are not aware of the fact that you coach them, but still they need to be coachable. You need to work with someone and have that trust and say, listen, you're gonna have that discussion with XYZ. Here's what we could be doing. Do you mind if I give you some tips or advice how I would do it? Something along that line. So you need to kind of, in your discovery call, you need to kind of get that feeling. Is that someone who you could work with? Because that is a prerequisite to controlling a conversation where you are not present at the table. So they need to be coachable to some degree. And also the champion should understand our own framework to help them close the deal with their decision makers, because everything is a sale, right? Everything is a sale. We want to close the sale with them. They want to close the deal internally with their decision makers. So how do we do that? Here are a few questions that you could and should ask your champion to prepare them for their own conversation with their internal decision-making board. And remember that the goal is very simple. The goal is to prevent and handle objections and to overcome any resistance internally in their organization, so that ultimately we'll get invited to the table, so that we can then actively control and lead the negotiations ourselves. So the goal is really just to move the deal forward to the next step. So that's the ideal situation that we are aiming for. Sometimes we are not invited to the table. A lot of times we are, and then we need to be prepared. And also we need to prepare prior to that to move the deal forward to that point. So here are a couple of questions that you can discuss with your champion. Number one, I'm using the placeholder budget holder right now. How did the budget holder make decisions in the past to allocate budget? So we want to find out what's their criteria, right? How do they tick? What do they allocate budget for and what not? That helps us to create that internal business case for them and with our champion. Number two, what's the best way for budget holder to know that our project is a mission critical must-have and not just a nice-have? So we want to establish that our solution, as we see it, because we know that we can help our buyer, our prospect, that it is being perceived internally as mission critical and a must-have, instead of just well, that's a nice-to-have, right? And you're always going against the internal workarounds. With any solution that's out there, it's just a commodity. All organizations have workarounds and solutions that already work. They might not work perfectly, but they work. So that's what we're up against. Not so much our competitors, but the internal workaround that is there in the organization. And that's what we're up against, right? So we need to position our solution and us as a vendor very specifically. Number three, third question, what's stopping the budget holder to activate internal resources rather than invest in a new solution like ours? So here we are asking a very blatant question, right? Why aren't you using your internal resources? Why should the budget holder invest in a new solution when you have resources? And so we trigger that critical thinking with that question. First, within our champion, is okay, how did the budget holder do that in the past? Which gives us a better understanding about the structure, about the decision-making process. But also we kind of provoke. We provoke something. Why should they go with us when they have internal workarounds? What's better going with us than using internal workarounds? Or what is worse with going with internal workarounds than, going with us? Number four, why would the budget holder invest in a new solution if internal resources could be cheaper, right? Especially when it's about the budget holder. It's always about either saving money, increasing the profit, and so forth. So it's very ROI driven. It's very focused on numbers. So we can provoke a response by asking these blatant questions. And I would ask that to myself, why should I invest in a new solution when we have resources available? We have a team that does that. We have maybe other solutions, other tools, other software that already works fine. Why would we all of a sudden change our vendor? Why would we even consider bringing another vendor in? And if that question is coming from you, because the budget holder will always think like that, all the decision makers think that. They try to avoid spending money, right? In most cases, they try to avoid spending money. So if you bring that up, instead of reacting to that at a later stage, That shows that you are knowledgeable, that you know how they think, that you can anticipate their next steps. Question number 5. How would we, as a vendor, know that we are on top of the budget holder's priority list? What we ask here, we ask about other projects that they are working on right now that might have a bigger priority. And if they have a bigger priority or a higher priority, how can we get on top of the list? How can we refine the value proposition that we have, that we might have already discussed, but maybe it's not as clear to the budget holders? How can we refine that and put that into our business case? And question number 6, and that's just, the 6 questions that I prepared for this live. And then there's a myriad of questions that you can ask this way or the other. Question number 6, what criteria did the budget holder apply in the past in situations similar to this one to allocate budget for a solution? So how did they do it in the past, right? When they maybe integrated a similar software or a software that is, in our case, maybe outdated and needs an upgrade with our solution. So how did they make decisions in the past? That's a really great indicator of how they might do and make decisions now and in the future. Because let's be honest, human beings rarely change that much. So once we have a pattern of how decisions are made, we can extrapolate, and 99% of the time, I think we hit the jackpot. So if you get a chance to speak to the budget holder or the decision-making board, you can use these questions, but you want to rephrase these questions because now you're not talking about a person, but to the person. So we need to slightly rephrase that. But the goal remains the same. The goal is to prevent any objections before they can manifest in a close lost. And ultimately, the goal is to get a seat at the table, to really talk to the decision makers, to talk to the veto stakeholders. Sometimes it's not possible to talk to all of them. That's why we have to coach and guide our champions. And sometimes it is possible. And that puts us in the best position ever, because now we can put the probing sales framework onto the decision-making board. We're not dependent on a third party, on a third person, i.e. our champion, because we know our stuff, right? We know how to facilitate purchase decisions faster and quicker and for sure with the probing sales framework. So we don't have to teach that to someone else. We can control the whole conversation. And that's it. Well, that's not it, but that's it for today's lunch break. We're 21 minutes in. This is one of the many ways that we have found how you can stop losing deals when you're not in the room with your buyers. Everything that I discussed right now is part of the probing sales framework that we have developed over the past 25 years, being in sales, being in marketing, and being in education. So all of that comes together in the probing sales framework. If you want to know more about the probing sales framework, that's all over my profile. So just go to my LinkedIn profile or go to our TikTok profile. There's a link section, click there. Also on LinkedIn, you'll see the banner moving around here. Just go to honeycombagency.co.uk and you'll find a plethora of free resources that get you started with the probing sales framework, and you can apply that within 24 hours and see the results. If you want to learn more, if you have any questions about what we discussed today, just feel free to send me a DM. Go to my profile, our profile on TikTok, send me a DM or leave a comment below, and I'll see you tomorrow for another lunch break.